Okay, last but not least, Father Jose Cyriac.
Hello, good afternoon. I know that you are all hungry, so I shall try to be brave. In first place, I would like to thank Father Solner for this opportunity to be part of this big family of safeguarding. Now let's travel to Central America. It is a privilege to speak at this conference. One commitment, many contests, safeguarding across cultures. My presentation focuses on how cultural context shapes intrafamilial abuse in Nicaragua and how this becomes a determining factor in the decision of young people to join pandilla. As you know, there are different types of gangs, and the term pandilla in Nicaragua refers particularly to street gangs. The purpose of this research was to explore the phenomenon of intrafamilial physical and sexual abuse suffered by members of pandilla in Managua, ex-members and also actual members, in order to determine its impact on their lives and how it was a defining factor in their decision to join pandilla. I used a qualitative phenomenological approach to capture their lived experiences. Let me begin with the voice of one of the young men I interviewed, whom I called Neymax. He was sexually abused by his father at the age of 9. Reflecting on his life, he said, "To overcome it," referring to the sexual abuse, "I attacked people, wandered on the streets, smoked marijuana, and I made it a way of life." Neymax recognized his participation in the street gangs as a way to cope with the experience of abuse suffered in his family. His story captures the heart of my research, the deep connection between abuse suffered at home, the cultural environment in which it happens, and the path that leads many children into gang life. Nicaragua is a Central American country with a high rate of violence against children due to political and economic instabilities, social insecurities, dysfunctional families, poverty, and fragile institutions. These conditions create a cultural environment where violence is often seen as normal. It has to be seen within the wider context of violence that the country has gone through over the past decades. Peña, a Nicaraguan author, says in this regard, "The history of Nicaragua is written with blood." The three cultural elements are especially important. First, normalized physical punishment. Physical punishment is widely accepted as a normal and necessary form of discipline, deeply rooted in cultural and historical patterns of violence. Because it is culturally normalized, even severe beatings are often seen as legitimate correction rather than abuse. Many children internalize blame, minimize their suffering, or believe that they deserve it. Parents shaped by authoritarian family norms and stress often do not recognize the harm they cause. The cultural acceptance hides abuse in plain sight, silences victims, and prevents early intervention, reinforcing a cycle where violence becomes an expected part of family life. The second is silence around sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is surrounded by deep silence and shame. Many cases remain hidden because victims fear judgment, retaliation, or not being believed. Most participants were abused at a very young age by family members living in the same household. Fear, shame, threats, cultural and developmental barriers prevented disclosure. Lack of trust in their families, grooming with gifts or threats, creating confusion and dependency were other factors. Cultural norms that discourage speaking about sexuality, combined with macho mentality, stigma, and the expectation of obedience to adults further reinforced their silence. Third, the fragile family structures. Family structures are often fragile. Children may be raised by single mothers, stepfathers, relatives, or neighbors, increasing their vulnerability. This cultural landscape shapes not only the abuse itself, but also how children interpret what is happening to them. How culture shapes the experience of abuse. In my research, all participants described physical abuse as rejection, not as discipline. They felt unwanted, unloved, and pushed out of their homes. Seven out of 12 participants experienced sexual abuse. Most struggled to speak about it due to cultural taboos around sexuality and masculinity. The cultural ideal of machismo played a major role. Many tried to prove their masculinity through aggression, sexual promiscuity, or even by becoming abusers themselves. This was not because they were evil, but because no alternative was offered to them for dealing with their pain. All the participants expressed having feelings of hatred towards the abuser, which was a driving force to their criminal activity in the gang. For example, one participant shared a particularly disturbing episode during my interview. He confessed to me that he killed one of his companions in the gang. This companion used to mock him by placing a gun to his head and calling him maricon, a derogatory colloquial term used to feminize or belittle a man. So his father also had done the same to him when he was a little boy, pointing a gun at his head and saying, "Vos sos un marica," means to say, "You are a marica." One day, he took this companion to an isolated place, pushed him to the ground, got on top of him, and choked him to death. As he watched his companion's eyes bulging out, the image of his father pointing a gun at him and calling him marica came to his mind. This episode shows how deeply abuse shapes identity and behavior. Why the gang becomes a refuge. In this context, the gang becomes more than a criminal group. It becomes a cultural refuge. The participants described a striking contrast. It's very interesting to see how these contrasts really have an impact on these children. At home, they felt rejected. In the gang, they felt accepted. At home, they felt fear. In the gang, they felt courage. At home, they felt like nobodies. In the gang, they felt important. At home, they felt powerless. In the gang, they felt strong because they had access to drugs, alcohol, weapons, and also money, and a false sense of acceptation and companionship. These contracts explain why the gang becomes a substitute family, a place where they feel seen, valued, and protected, even if that protection is ultimately false. Coping strategies between the risk and resilience. The participants used both negative and positive coping strategies in response to the trauma of abuse and neglect. The negative strategies were more visible, faced with overwhelming pain, rejection, and instability at home. They turned to alternatives most easily available in their environment: gang involvement, alcohol, drugs, and antisocial activities. These behaviors were not simply acts of rebellion, but attempts to survive, numb emotional wounds, and find a sense of belonging where the family had failed. On the other hand, Nicaragua is a traditionally Catholic country, and spirituality is deeply embedded in its cultural fabric. This made faith and church groups important sources of comfort, identity, and support. 2 participants even left gang life thanks to pastoral accompaniment, showing how culturally rooted institutions, especially the church, can play a powerful role in safeguarding. Prevention, safeguarding must be culturally grounded. Effective safeguarding must be rooted in the culture, in the cultural, social, and family realities. Punitive approaches are not always the best ways. We must address the deeper causes of vulnerability, abuse and violence at home, fragile family structures, lack of support, and the search for belonging that often leads children towards gang life. Some key strategies include, first, we must move beyond mano dura, the iron fist policies that they rely on repression, ignore cultural and familiar roots of gang involvement. This policy was implemented in El Salvador, and it resulted not in a positive way. Second, we must strengthen families. Safeguarding begins at home by addressing physical and sexual abuse and supporting parents who struggle. Third, the Catholic Church must take a more active role. Despite its enormous influence, the Church in Nicaragua has not yet developed strong, coordinated safeguarding programs. My research recommends collaboration with the family apostolate and the creation of diocesan and national structures for child protection. As you know, the situation in Nicaragua is a difficult situation at the moment because there's a kind of dictatorship, and also the relationship with the church with the government is not in a good way. So it's a difficult task at this moment. Finally, we must empower communities, creating safe spaces, job opportunities, and reintegration programs for youth leaving gangs. My research offers a victim-centered, culturally sensitive perspective that contributes to prevention strategies in the particular context of Nicaragua. Safeguarding cannot be universalized without understanding culture. In Nicaragua, violence is normalized, silence is cultural, masculinity is socially constructed, and the gang becomes a refuge when families fail. So our commitment to safeguarding is one, but the contexts in which we work are many. If we want to protect children and youth effectively, we must listen to their stories, understand their cultures, and respond with compassion, creativity, and cultural humanity. Thank you.